hit apply. Then we'll specify the networking, and I will be using the same network as where our PostgreSQL deployment sits. We'll then go over the tagging, hit review and create, and then click the create button to provision the service. Now, as this service provisions, there's of course we could wait for this to complete, but let's have a look on what else we need to do in order for us to be able to provide a migration task. One of the things that we mentioned there is we have to export a schema from the source server and then go put that on the destination Azure database or PostgreSQL. We could use pgdump and then specify the -s parameters to just do the export of a schema, but let me show you on how you can do this with Azure Data Studio. And if you haven't used Azure Data Studio yet, Azure Data Studio is a cross-platform database tool that you could use on premises or to connect to cloud platforms on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. The great capabilities of this is that it actually gives you intelligence. You could connect to multiple servers and multiple environments. And so what I will do is we'll make a connection to the PostgreSQL environment that I want to migrate for. Now, the on-premises environment in my demo here is simulated by Linux VM with PostgreSQL. It's got a sample database that you can take advantage of if you later want to do something like this as well. We have that content covered to learn as well. So let's have a look on this virtual machine and connect to it. And of course, what I would be able to do here is then use the backup feature, which gives me similar capabilities as pgdump. So what we'll specify here is that I have an output path that's going to go to C PostgreSQL, and we'll name this AdventureWorks.SQL. I can do some advanced settings and specify whether or not I just want to have the data, what I want to do with the create database statement. So I will specify that I don't want to create database statements, but I would love to export a schema. And then there's plenty of options you can specify on whether or not you want to put an if exist in front of the creation of an object or whatsoever. Really a great useful capability here. So let's click OK here. And you'll see that this backup is actually performing in the background a pgdump to then export that to the output file. So as this backup and dump completed, we'll now create a destination database. So we'll connect to that PostgreSQL instance, and we'll start with opening up the create database statement. So it's just a basic create database statement, and then we'll define a role that we'll be using for the migration. Now, once that this is created, we'll then connect to the database using that login. And we'll see that my destination database is in there. And now we're ready to go create that destination schema. So as we exported the schema, we'll review the export and we'll see that's created by a pgdump. It lists me the version and so on as well. And now we can go ahead and create that destination database. Let's do a quick validation to make sure the destination database has been created. So we'll see that I have my database and objects now sitting in that instance. Now, before we can do the actual migration, what we have to do is make sure we remove the primary key foreign key constraints and make sure we can guarantee a successful import. So what we'll do is the following. We open up this query file that will help me to find what my key constraints are. So this will generate me the alter table statement that I have to execute within this database to remove all the constraints. What I can do is I can just pretty much take this, copy it, well, let's just paste that here, and execute. Now, of course, what I'll have to do afterwards, I'll have to re-add these constraints. I already scripted these out as part of a preparation exercise, so you could just use that script to then go create these database assets. Okay, so what's next? Let's have a look on how to set up the actual migration and look on the configuration of our database migration service. To set up a migration project, we'll go to the Azure Database Migration Services, and we will create a new migration project. I'll give this project a name. We'll specify the source, perform an online migration. And as you see here, to successfully perform the migration, you need to migrate the schema first, remove the foreign keys, disable the triggers, and then provision the database migration service and task, which is what we're doing now, the previous steps we just executed upon. So using the migration wizard, we'll specify the source server, specify the username, one thing that you have to keep in mind as well is that the user needs to have replication permission in the source database, because we're using PostgreSQL replication to migrate the data and keep the data in sync with the PostgreSQL database service. Then we'll specify the target server. We can just take this from the drop-down box, specify username and password as well. And in the next step, we'll select the databases and user databases we want to migrate. So you have the possibility there to select more than one database. We'll take this AdventureWorks database. Next step will be to selecting the tables. Of course, we have to define what's going to be our target database, for which we already pre-populated the schema. Now, if I want to accomplish a partial migration, I could just select the tables and the schemas that I would need. In this case, we'll select all of the tables. On the advanced settings of the configure migration option, you can specify what the maximum number of tables per load and how many tables will load in parallel. We'll just keep the default. We'll then specify the activity name, and then we'll perform the actual migration. As this activity executes, you can hit refresh and look at the level of detail. It currently says that your restore is in progress. You could also click down into the details and you see that the full load has been completed. Currently, there's no activity on the database, so no incremental updates will take place. Let's have a look if we were to be inserting some new records into the database and how that would reflect into the destination. So let's bring in Azure Data Studio to show you an actual replication will take place. Now, as we restored our foreign key constraints and we're ready to cut over the database after we did testing, we could just start the cutover, which will stop the incoming transactions to the source database, and at the very same time, apply the last changes to the target database and complete the actual cutover. And there we go. We just performed the live migration using Azure Database Migration Services. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay, so I hope that was pretty cool. We just did our live migration, and that database is actually keeping in sync until we do that cutover. Then again, some of the post-migration considerations and performance and evaluating your performance is key of that, but also really thinking about what's your backup and resource strategy and whether or not you should enable geo-redundancy. Well, the business continuity and disaster recovery, we have automated backup. Again, the default is 7 days backup retention. We could change that to 35 days, but the geo redundancy, really replicating that server over to another Azure region, needs to be addressed during creation. So one way to avoid that is actually modify it during a restore process. But this is really something you should consider, right? The first question you need to ask yourself when you're starting this migration project, do I want and need geo redundancy of the server to fail over to another region? The local redundancy in many cases is really sufficient, but for high availability purposes and that kind of failover, often geo redundancy is certainly something to consider. Now, we talked about these Azure services for MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, SQLDB, you name it. And one of the powerful capabilities and features really sit in this read replica feature that replicates the data from one server over to a read-only server. That using asynchronous, using the PostgreSQL engine to replicate from the primary up to 5 replicas. The feature is actually meant for scenarios where the lag is acceptable and meant for uploading queries. A very common scenario are business intelligence scenarios where you need to do reporting, and it doesn't necessarily, you can have minutes or delays whatsoever, some latency between these workloads in order for you to represent results and data to the business. It's also a very common scenario for read-heavy workloads, which might be coming from web apps or any form of analytics, or a very commonly used technique to bring the data closer to the users when users are looking and targeting some dedicated tools onto a data center that they will give them less latency compared to the data center that the initial server was being configured. Now, as we mentioned, query performance is like, what are the capabilities and tools that I have around query performance? So the query performance inside view gives you that capability and that viewpoint on what are my top weight events, what are my long-running queries, what are my poor performing queries. It will give you insights into the event type and the event name, give you the query ID, and also give you insights into the query text. So you can then evaluate on some of these actions that you might want to take in order to move things forward and in order for you to start optimizing. So query performance monitoring is one aspect. Query performance insights and the Azure performance recommendations that come from this feature really allow you to look on some index advisors on whether or not you want to create additional indexes based on the usage of the database. The recommendation tool will actually give you that performance recommendation. It will give you a create index or a drop index analysis and really say like, hey, if you were to implement this, this is going to give you some better performance. Now, we did mention this at the beginning of the session. We talked about advanced threat protection. This is probably one of the core features that I really would like you to configure as you're spinning up this server. Not only does it detect the anomalous database activities, which could be some potential security threats to the database, that could go to some really weird query behavior based on the connection that's being sent or based on the source IP address and so on. So you have some really good insights to provide security and alerts on anomalous database activities and prevent things like SQL injections and so on as well. So that's a very easy thing to configure and very easy thing to enable. You just do this in the portal like I
previously showed you. Well, let me just bring this back for just 1 second here, because what you would do there is go to this server setting here and actually configure advanced threat protection, just in a very similar way that you enable the intelligent performance here, or you can enable the read replicas in a very similar fashion. You would enable advanced threat protection and then set up an alert system that would automatically notify subscription owners or admins about this performance or threat-related issue. Very easy to configure and actually very easy to understand and implement. At the same time, what I showed you previously is that this server has been up and running, has been configured. That really takes me to the call to action, not only for this session, but for everything that you have done as part of the Azure virtual training days. So switching back to the presentation here for one of these last slides, is what we've shown you is really a great opportunity to get your hands on Azure data. We have a set of learning paths and a certification that's called Azure Data Fundamentals, which gives you a really great overview of all the data capabilities that we have on Azure. One of the other learning paths that is not referenced here, but you'll discover that on the Learn portal, as well as we have also an AI fundamentals that will lead you to that certification. And then for those DBAs in the room that really want to get hands-on with Azure Database Administration, we also have a role-based certification called the Azure Database Administration Associate. So I really encourage you to continue your learning and get into this motion of really exploring these technologies. I do hope that you got a lot of value out of this session, out of the Azure Training Day all up. So I really have nothing left to say than thank you for your time. Thank you for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending and joining these sessions today. This concludes our Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day on Linux and open source database migrations. Really want to appreciate your effort of joining us in this virtual training day, and also want to point you out to some of the follow-up actions on Microsoft Learn, where you can take self-paced learning options, and do ensure yourself to also follow our calendars for future virtual training day events as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful time.